morning we are looking at continuing on the series that we began last week. We're calling it Who is Jesus? And we're looking at these 7 curious statements that Jesus makes. They're often referred to as the I am statements. They're sort of these 7 divine metaphors that Jesus uses to describe himself. Last week, Pastor Dave introduced that series here as with the line, when Jesus said, I am the bread of life. This morning, we're going to unpack when Jesus says, I am the light of the world. But I thought as I was thinking about this series and I was thinking of describing it, we may need to just pause before we jump into the text here. And oftentimes when we come to church, we get into church mode, we get into Sunday school mode, and we see things, we talk about Jesus, we talk about religious things, and it just seems blasé, like we could kind of yawn. It all seems to be normal, all seems to make sense. And we actually miss how wild, how crazy, how often audacious it is, the things that we're talking about. And sometimes you sort of have to transport ourselves out of what we might call sort of our churchy world, our churchy cluster, and try to think about the same way of how this would sound in our day-to-day lives, in our day-to-day world. Think if I am about to describe someone, if I'm going to tell you who is, and we'll just call him Bob, right? We have certain assumptions already in our mind about how to describe different people, like how we would describe Bob. So for example, probably one of the first things we would assume, if I'm describing somebody named Bob to you, I would explain, describe his physical attributes, right? Is Bob tall? Is he short? Is he bald? Or is he blonde? Does he have a beard? Does he wear glasses? Is he young or old? Does he have tattoos, right? We describe those things. Maybe we'll describe his nationality. Is he Swedish or Egyptian or Japanese, right? That's sort of how we assume we describe people. We assume that we would describe Bob relationally, right? He's the brother of Susie or the husband of Mildred. He has, 3 kids. He's the neighbor of Frank. He just lives down there on Louisa Street next to the Brown family, right? This, again, similar ways we would assume that we would describe someone. We would describe Bob by his interests and his vocation. He loves golf. He's a retired school chamber. He's on the board at the local chamber or something like that. We describe Bob maybe by his personality. Bob, he's either extroverted or he's introverted. He's got a great sense of humor, or he's a very serious person, right? These are just the natural ways in which we would describe, or we would assume someone is described. In a sense, there's part of that, and there's a reason why we would describe Jesus that way, but that's not really what we're doing in the series. Jesus, he's, the son of Mary and Joseph. He's got a background in carpentry. He's got 12 friends that he liked to hang around with. Like, we would describe him in similar ways, and there's a place for that, but that's not the way we're describing him, and that's not the way that he's described. I think he's doing it in a much more peculiar way. Just imagine, for example, Bob, he's applying for a job. And I'm a good friend with Bob, and so I'm getting called for a reference for Bob. So they call me up, says, "Oh, Bob's applied for a job here, and can you tell?" And you're one of his reference. Can you tell us a little bit about Bob? Be odd if I just said, "Bob, yeah, good guy, good guy." It's kind of like a gate. Actually, no. Let me take it back. It's more like bread, maybe even Wonder Bread, right? We're like, that's not how we describe people, right? But this is, as we're talking about Jesus here, that's kind of what we're talking about, but it's actually even a little bit wilder. It's even a little bit crazier than that, because this is Jesus saying it about himself. Now imagine Jesus is there, or let's say it's Bob, and he's actually in that job interview, and his employer or potential employer is saying, okay, describe to me, tell me a little bit about yourself. And his answer is like this. You remember that line, that famous line by Jack Nicklaus in A Few Good Men when he says, "You can't handle the truth." Remember that line? I can top it. I am the truth, right? I am the way, the truth, and the life. We'd be like, this guy's nuts, right? But sometimes we come to church and we realize, we say these things, this is what we're talking about, like, oh yeah, that's just Sunday school. Jesus is the light of the world. Jesus is the resurrection and life. Yeah, we've heard it all. But if you or I tried to talk that way, we would all think we were crazy. So this week we want to look at Jesus' first statement, or this statement that we're going to look at, probably one of the most familiar of these 7 I am statements. And it is that Jesus is the light. When he says, I am the light of the world, he says this twice. The first place he says, and I'll just read it quickly here, is John 8, verse 12. And it's just almost out of nowhere. Jesus has this crowd in front of him. And it says this: when Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. We're going to kind of unpack that a little bit later. But again, let's just remember sort of the audacity. As soon as he says that, we're going to realize that the first instinct from a number of people was they were offended. And we might think, oh, well, why should they be offended? Well, I know Pastor Dave and Pastor Matt last week, when they introduced this series, they talked about that notion of that I am, that it goes all the way back to Moses and the burning bush, where we get literally the sacred name of Jesus, I am that I am, right? So when Jesus is making that claim, he's already making a divine statement. And we're also going to see when he says, I am the light of the world, he's also making a divine statement. But even if you take that aside, just even take that divine aspect, imagine if I walked in here this morning, came up to the platform and said, well, good morning, I'm glad to be here. And Bob Cajun, thanks for being here. I just want to let you know that I am the light of Fenelon Falls. I am the light of Trentside Baptist. In fact, I am the light of the Kawartha Lakes. You know, forget about Jesus, forget about those other 2 pastors, Dave and Pastor Matt, or even Pastor Mark. I'm the true light. And if you're not following me, you're walking in darkness. Probably your first thought is, wow, that guy is arrogant. Right? That's crazy talk. This is how the people responded when Jesus said it. And sometimes we hear these things in church and go, huh. And we're not paying to realize how audacious it is and how powerful those statements are. I always love it, that one line from C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis, in his classic work, Mere Christianity, he talks about Jesus being either Lord Liar or lunatic. And he says this, that a lot of people want to claim Jesus just as this moral teacher, this wonderful moral teacher, but nothing more. But he says this, look, no one would be a good moral teacher who said the crazy things that Jesus said. He either had to be who he said he was, or in fact, I love this, or he has to be a man at the same level who says he's a poached egg, or possibly even worse, somebody who'd be the devil of hell, right? He doesn't give us the option to be just a good moral teacher, right? So when he makes these 7 I am statements, it's much bigger than that. It's either he's a crazy man, or he's an evil man, or he actually is who he says he is. Well, let's look and just unpack a little bit more this Jesus as the light of the world. And I'm going to give you 3 things that I think are really important for us to understand about it. But let me just quickly give you an idea of how Jesus and this theme of light comes across in the book of John, or the Gospel of John. So first of all, Jesus refers to himself twice as the light of the world, both in chapter 8 and chapter 9. In 2 additional places, in numerous times, but in sections, Jesus refers to himself as light. When John introduces Jesus at the beginning of the book, he introduces Jesus as the light. And you'll see that just in the very opening verses of his gospel. And then also Jesus encourages the people when he was administering that they better walk in the light, take advantage of the light while it lasts. So that's how it's portrayed. It's a pretty big theme throughout John's gospel. But one of the first things that I want us to do, out of the 3 key things, and we understand when Jesus says, I am the light of the world, is when he's saying that, he's saying light is a divine attribute. He's actually claiming divinity. He's claiming his relationship with the Father. And anyone who heard that would not miss that. Right? We talk about a person who can come up and they can have the personality that lights up a room, or that person has a real spark about them, or somebody who's smart. We call them as very bright. But this is not the light we are talking about. We started out singing all of our songs about this holiness of God, and that's really connected, right? God is described both as the purified physical light, but also purified moral light. Again, probably one of the best examples of Jesus described in this way is in the benediction of Paul's letter in 1 Timothy when he describes Jesus this way: he who is blessed and only sovereign, the King of kings and Lord of lords, and verse 6:16, who alone possesses immortality and dwells in unapproachable light, whom no man has seen or can see, to him be honor and eternal dominion. Amen. It's a divine quality. Maybe the best place where we see it, I mean, there's lots of places we can look in the Bible to see, but maybe the two coolest places, most curious places, are right the bookends at the Bible, the first chapter and the second last chapter of the Bible, beginning and the end. Remember Genesis chapter 3, that first line that comes out of God's mouth is, "Let there be light." And we are told that there was light. And then God separated the light from the darkness, and we have the first day. But what's almost completely wonkadoodle about that statement is if you go fall down through the days of creation, it's not till day 4 that we actually get the creation of the sun, moon, and the stars. How on earth do we have light without the sources of light? Now, some people will say, well, back then they were kind of old, they were kind of ignorant, they didn't know such things. And, that's why they made a statement like that. There's a theological term for that. It's called baloney. Right? It wasn't written in ignorance, it was written to make a statement. Right? When Genesis was formed, it was when they were escaping Egypt. Who was the head god in Egypt? If you know anything about Egyptian mythology, it's Ra, the sun god, right? Just about every god in the ancient world, they knew that one at the top is the sun, because everybody knew that if our life exists, if there's power anywhere, that big glowing orb in the sky is we're dependent on. And then the Israelites come and says, yeah. But our source of light, it gets that source of light from our God, who's bigger and greater, not vice versa. That thing is just a tool in the sky to mark days and times and all sorts of things. It's not a God in and of itself. And then think about just the way the Bible ends in the book of Revelation, and we get this picture of the new heaven and the new earth. Chapter 21, verses 23 to 24, it says this: the city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and the Lamb is its lamp. The nations will walk by its lamp, and the King of the earth will bring their splendor into it. We can't even fathom light that's not derived from the sun and from the heavens above. God says, the new heaven and earth, the light will shine from me. So when Jesus says, I am the light, it's a double. The I am statement and the light of the world is a double divine statement that God is, and no self-respecting Jew would have missed that. Listen to the way John introduces Jesus in his book. Verse 3, again, John starts off with those familiar words: in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. But jump down to verse 3, it says this: through him all things were made, and without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. There came a man who was sent from God. His name was John. That's John the Baptist. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all men might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to every man was coming into the world. Right? That's the way John describes Jesus. And then in verse 14, he says, we saw that light. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. So the first statement about Jesus being the light of the world is it's a divine statement about who he is. The second two are a little bit more scarier, if that's not scary enough and intimidating enough. But then Jesus says that this divine light is either embraced or it's rejected. When I just read those first lines from John, I intentionally left out a few verses from chapter 1. So again, just as John introduces Jesus as the light, listen to what he says in verse 10 through 13 in chapter 1. He says this: he was in the world, that's Jesus as the light, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, or of a husband's will, but born of God. And it's amazing. He says, right from the beginning, this light came into the world. And actually, those who most expected and you would think be most anxious to have it, they were some of the first to reject it. But some of the most unexpected, the last people, they were the ones ready to embrace it. We're going to see how that plays out a little bit more in just a moment. But it's in chapter 3 where Jesus really makes this more explicit. Chapter 3 is one of the more familiar chapters of John's gospel. It's well known for Jesus is having this discussion with this religious leader at his time by the name of Nicodemus. This is where we hear those famous words about being the need to be born again. But probably we're most familiar with John 3:16, where Jesus tells Nicodemus, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. But I want to pick out just another little passage from John chapter 3. Here's a quick question, a little Sunday school quiz question. Does anybody remember when Nicodemus was meeting with Jesus for this discussion? Nighttime. Very good. Thank you, Julie. I think we got some chocolate eggs there. Give her some. Nighttime. Nicodemus is a religious leader. He's part of the Jewish council, the Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin doesn't like Jesus very much. So the only way he's going to meet with Jesus, because he's a little bit curious, is to meet with Jesus under the cover of night. But then Jesus says these words. I'm going to pick it up in chapter 3, verse 19. He goes, this is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but men love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that his deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light so that it may be seen plainly that what he has done has been done through God. And again, you remember this is a time before electricity. Basically, life started when the sun came up and life ended when the sun came down. You don't go out at night. And there's a couple things that Jesus is doing. First, he's making a pretty not so subtle jab at Nicodemus with this. Right? Why are you visiting me at night? Because you want to stay hidden. You don't want to be exposed. But then he's making a much broader statement. And this is the scary statement. The truth is, one of the reasons we don't come into the light is because we like our darkness. Light exposes. Light exposes sin, exposes evil. And we do not want to be exposed. Right? When Jesus says, I am the light of the world, I am here to bring exposure on this earth. I am to bring illumination. And to understand that is a very, very scary thought. And he says out, the reason why people don't like me is because they prefer their evil. They prefer their own darkness. And this brings us to the third thing. It says not only we have the choice to embrace or to reject this light that Jesus offers, but Jesus actually exposes the incredible lengths we will go to protect our darkness, protect our dark side. I want to go back to that first statement where Jesus says, I am the light of the world, and look at them. I'm going to kind of go through two chapters really, really quick, but they need to be seen together. So again, chapter 8, verse 12, Jesus comes in, there's a crowd of people, and he says these words. When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Now, Jesus is not just saying this is like a little Sunday school answer and everybody's going, oh, isn't that sweet? That's a nice thing that he says. He knows by when he's going to say that he's going to offend people. And right on cue, people are offended and the usual suspects are offended. And listen to what happens immediately as soon as he says that. Verse 13, the Pharisees challenged him and they said, here you are appearing as your own witness. Your testimony is not valid. Right? As soon as he said it, people stood up and said, that's not true, blasphemy. And one of the reasons why they said it is true, and they went back to this Old Testament regulation where if in a state of law, you have to have at least 2 witnesses to make a statement to claim some sort of truth. And I won't go through all of chapter 8, there's a lot in there. But in chapter 8, you do not meet Jesus meek and mild. And Jesus goes toe to toe with the religious leaders throughout this chapter, right? He knows this is going to offend them. And the first thing he says, actually, if you knew your father, the one who you claimed, you wouldn't need another witness. I am not like anybody else, but because you don't know your Bible, because you do not know your father, you do not accept me. And then he goes on, and I can just show you, like, he takes them to task, right? He offends them every which way, right? He tells these religious leaders that they're going to die in their sins and that they will not go where Jesus is going. He tells them that they are from below, but he is from above. I think I've got those on the slides below. He tells them that they are of the world, but Jesus is not of this world. He tells them in different places that these people are going to try to kill him. They want to silence him so much. They tell them that they don't belong to the Father above, but their father is the devil. And again, in multiplies, he reminds them over and over that these so-called religious leaders don't belong to God. And then in verse 58, right, he starts this statement, says, I am the light of the world. And he ends with another I am statement. 58, he says this, I tell you the truth, Jesus answered, before Abraham was born, I am. Right? So if the first one didn't get the subtle hint the first time, they're definitely going to get it there. Right? Your top person, your ancestor, I'm bigger and I'm greater than him. The one that you're appealing to, I'm over and above. Do you think they got the subtlety? Do you think they were offended? Like, oh, this sounds nice. This is great. Let's just maybe agree to disagree. Let's shake hands. And then it ends with this. It goes, at this, they picked up stones to stone him, but Jesus hid himself, slipped away from the temple grounds. Right? They were so angry at him, they were ready to kill him. Right? They were going to do anything to protect them. Now you kind of think, oh, well, that's it. But I want you to just go back to one thing. Remember how Jesus said, he goes, I'm the light of the world. And they say, prove it. Give us a witness. Chapter 9 is where Jesus gives them the witness. And let's see how they respond when he responds to them. Verse 9, chapter 9 starts this way. And as he went along, he saw a blind man from birth. What a better example of somebody who can show light from darkness, right? Somebody who's born in darkness. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus responded, neither this man nor his parents had sinned, said Jesus, but this is happening so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. Right? This is going to be my witness. This is going to be my testimony. And he says this, as long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. But while I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Right? So it's linking this passage to the next passage. And then again, just to move through it quickly, Jesus does this kind of peculiar thing. He spits on the ground, kind of mixes saliva and makes mud, and he sticks it on the eyeballs of this poor blind gentleman. And then he tells the blind man, he goes, I want you to go to the pool of Siloam. And what's funny, he says, the Bible even says, which means the pool of scent. It's almost as like, yeah, Jesus is now going out of his way to send this guy back to these religious leaders. So he goes there, he cleans off his eyes, he can see. The people are astounded. They all know this man is born blind. And they say, we got to take him back to the religious leaders. Now, you would think that these religious leaders, wow, you were blind. You can see this must be the greatest day ever. We should be so excited. But how do they react? They are irate. They do not buy it. They say, well, it's on the Sabbath. If Jesus really was from God, he would never heal on the Sabbath. And they fight him tooth and nail. In fact, they say, you also need to give us a witness. We want your parents. So they have to bring his parents in. The parents are terrified. They're scared of these people. And they're like, I don't know what to say. I want to stay out of it, but we will testify that he was born blind and I don't know where his sight came from. So then they go to this person, this young man, they like denounce Jesus, denounce him, denounce him, denounce him. And listen in verse 30 how this blind man responds. The man answered, now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly man who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. Right? This guy is the witness that they were asking. So like, okay, now we understand, now we believe two people have witnessed, we're good. Listen to their response. To this they replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us, and threw him out. Nice guys, eh? Beautiful people. This man goes back to Jesus and Jesus says, do you believe? And he says, yes, I do. The religious leaders say, oh, so are we blind too? Does that mean we're blind? And kind of mock Jesus. Jesus says, you stand condemned by your own words. You said it, not me. You notice how the incredible lengths they went to protect whatever power, prestige, whatever pride, evil it was. These are the people that should have been most anxious, most awaiting the coming Messiah. And when he came, they did the most to fight him. And thinking about this, we have this idea when we think about sin, right? The idea of Jesus being the light of the world is a scary thought, right? It has a way of exposing us for who we are. And we actually got to choose, do we choose the sort of the dark side or come to the light side? And the funny thing is we go through to incredible lengths to hide the darkness. It was funny, I was just thinking of this week, I kind of have this test that you know something is evil, you know something is wrong, morally wrong, when you think about the lengths in which it's defended. One of the tests that I have is what euphemisms are used to hide something that is actually pretty ugly and sinister. Just think about some of the things even in our old world. Some of the creative ways that we can try to make something that look good that is actually, when you get down the right, is actually pretty scary. Think of this, the killing of unborn children in the womb, we call it reproductive justice, women's health care. Assisted suicide, we call it end-of-life care, right? What's there to care for when there's no more life? We're at a time where we're intentionally chemically inducing castration on young men and infertility on women and surgically removing healthy reproductive body parts, and we call it affirmation. That's a scary thought, right? We call pornography, adult entertainment, self-expression. In Canada, we're not allowed to call it prostitution. We call it sex work because it might stigmatize, right? Probably the most scary and most exploitive industry imaginable. I always love that expression. It's like putting lipstick on a pig, right? It's still a pig, no matter how much lipstick you cover on it. But we will go to incredible lengths to hide things that are pretty wretched, pretty evil, pretty scary, because we want to stay in our dark side. So what's the deal with this? Where do we go with this? Often one of the things we sing about is, first thing you're taught as a kid in Sunday school, Jesus is the light of the world, right? One of our favorite blast songs, he is the light, he is the light, he is the light of the world. And you almost think of that as just this wonderful, positive, upbeat thing, right? It's kind of like God just, Jesus sends out good vibes, fairy godmother sprinkling fairy dust to make everybody feel good. And there's a truth to that. It's good, but that's a lot more to it than that. The first thing that it reminds us is that Jesus did not actually come to affirm us the way we are. that everything is all right and perfect with us. There's this kind of popular notion in this world that, the church, they're the ones that are really mean and they're the ones that really are judgmental. But it's Jesus. He's, like he's our homeboy. He's the good guy. He's the one that just gives us high fives and just loves us no matter how we are. Let me put it very truthfully here. The church is completely anemic in comparison to Jesus. Jesus is the judge, not the church. Yes, the church has done a lot of mean things, terrible things, and Jesus has never done anything and will never do anything mean. But he's the one who separates the sheep from the goats. He's got a lot more powerful than us. And if you have a Jesus that just always affirms you and everything that you do is always lined up with Jesus, you have not met the Jesus of the Bible. Okay? Just think, again, going back to Jesus as that little baby being held by Simeon in the temple at his dedication. The first thing that Simeon came out of his mouth when he's holding Jesus as a little baby, looks at mother and he says this child is destined to cause the falling and rising of many in Israel and to be a sign that will be spoken against so that the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed. If you don't want your heart to be revealed for what it is, then you do not want to meet Jesus as the light of the world. The second thing, and this is also to note, it's amazing the people who were most offended, who were most protected of the dark, and the most who are willing to embrace it, right? It's easy to listen to say, yeah, Jeff, go in, you tell those terrible people, the communists and the, Hollywood and whatever, all those, the annoying TikTok stars that my kids watch that are just annoying. I don't know if they're bad or not. I just don't like them. Whatever it is, you tell them. But the people that were most upset, and I love our church elder board, but they were the equivalent of the church elders, right? They were the people that you would assume would be the most righteous, the people you would assume want to meet the Messiah the most. And it was the most unlikeliest, right? It was the sinners, the prostitutes, the tax collectors who welcomed them more. So really, even too, as a church, we're the first person. Before we think of it, does Jesus expose the darkness in other people? What darkness is he exposing in me first and foremost before we worry about it exposing it in other people? And are we willing to accept it? And lastly, again, these are pretty strong things, but this I think is the real cool thing, the absolutely stunning thing, and the most beautiful thing of all, is that yes, this is Jesus being the light of the world really is good news, but it actually begins with harsh news. It starts with scary news. But this is the cool thing. Let me just end with this analogy. Think about it this way. Imagine you're just not feeling very well, right? You can't put your finger on it. For a number of weeks, you're just feeling lethargic. You're feeling achy. Your body's not working the way it's supposed to work, but you don't have a flu, you don't have a cough, you don't have those normal sick symptoms. So you finally go to the doctors and say something's wrong. They run all sorts of battery tests. And when they come back, the doctor says, I need to meet with you, need to meet with the family. And you hear the words that you do not want to hear. I hate to tell you this, but you have cancer. Right? It's devastating. Nobody wants to hear the words. Probably just like the religious leaders, oh, give me a second opinion. Bring someone in and says, no, it's true. We did the test. We looked at them. You have cancer. The one thing we respond is we don't go, how dare you? I do not have cancer. We'll just call it alternative wellness or some other kind of name for it. No. What we do, we gain our composure and we go to our doctor and we say, okay, how are we going to deal with this? How do we beat it? How do we get rid of it? Where do we go? But here's the beautiful thing when Jesus says he's the light of the world. He looks at the world and he says, this darkness that is in all of our hearts and all of our lives is a cancer. You have it. I'm here to expose it. But now let me tell you how I'm going to treat it. Here's how I'm going to cure it. I'm going to provide for you. I'm going to take that darkness on myself. I will take that chemotherapy on the cross. Right? He wants to deal with it. He wants to take it away from us, carry that burden on himself. That's incredible. But it actually has to have us start by saying, yeah, there might be a cancer, there might be a darkness in me that I got to get rid of. And when Jesus says, I am the light of the world, it gives us a choice. We either say, no, I love my darkness, I'm going to hold on to it for all its cost. Or we see it for what it is a cancer, and we say, oh, I'm so grateful for Jesus that he has come and provided the cure and the way out and the healing. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, this morning, we claim as you claim that you are the light of the world. And Lord, it's one of those lines and statements that we sing about and we say, it just kind of rolls off our tongue for, as we grow up in the church. But very often we don't pause to consider what it actually means for us. And Lord, that statement really is a dividing line. A line in the sand that we need to decide which side we stay on. Do we cling to our darkness and hold on to our sin? Or do we walk into the blessed hope of your beautiful light? And Lord, again, I just pray that even this day, that if there is anyone who's holding on to sin, who's saying, I don't want to cross that line, may they see the light that comes from you. And may they embrace the hope and the cure of our brokenness and our darkness in Jesus Christ. Amen.